Good afternoon, everyone. It's very nice to have you with us. My name is Judith Pucci, and I am a Tribute Center walking tour guide. And this afternoon, you're going to hear stories told to you by two of my fellow guides. But first, we were standing out earlier by the memorial, and we saw the French flags that were placed there. And Matt reminded me of the headline in a French newspaper after September 11th, and it said, "Now we are all Americans." Sadly, it now falls to us to reassure the French that we stand with them as well. The stories that you're going to hear from Matt and Gino are not the typical September 11th stories in that they do not deal with the historic events of that day. Rather, they explore the personal costs of September 11th. So let me introduce you to these two boys here. Gino is a native New Yorker, and he was born and raised in this city, and he has been a New York City police officer for 18 years. That is Gino down at the end. And then Matt is a construction worker. He is currently working on the transportation hub that is being built outside. That is the building that looks like, well, I hope it looks better, but it looks like this, right? Okay. It's built, by the way, on the image of a bird in flight. See, that's it. Many people think it looks more like a dinosaur, but that's what it is. We are going to begin with Gino, so I'm just going to set the scene for you. The attacks of September 11th, they reduced the World Trade Center to 1.8 million tons of debris. The first responders who worked here for 24 hours a day for 9 months during the rescue, recovery, and cleanup. When they were here in the early days after the attacks, what they did was they didn't have sophisticated tools or equipment. They really worked with hand tools, and they were known as the bucket brigade. And they simply filled plastic buckets with debris early on, hoping to find survivors. And Gino was part of that extraordinary effort. Gino, it's all yours.
Okay. Hello. Hi. On September 11th, 2001, I was not working in Lower Manhattan. I was working in Brooklyn South in wonderful Coney Island. If you have the chance, come down. But if you talk to any cop in the NYPD, they'll tell you that working in any other place, especially Brooklyn, is distinctly different from working in Lower Manhattan. But after 9/11, that all kind of got thrown out the window. Everybody is now faced with the same challenges, same fears, the same adversities. And of course, we were no different. Our frustrations were a little different working in Brooklyn, and I didn't quite understand it then, but I do understand it a lot better now. And some of them was very easy to put together when you think back on it. For instance, when an area gets hit like this, so you get Lower Manhattan, what they often do for extra personnel is they draw from the surrounding areas first. So people from downtown Brooklyn and maybe the village and lower parts of Manhattan were sent to come in and help. And then us in the further areas, we were sent in to backfill that void of the people that left to come over here. So as you can imagine, when you're seeing the smoke and you're close enough to smell what's going on and hear it and see it, yet you're not part of it, not tangibly, it can be a little frustrating. And if you understand, like when this happened, we all knew people that were in the building. We knew people that were trapped here. We knew people that worked here and were not being found. So in the days and weeks following, it became a very great challenge for all of us. But it only took one day for me to kind of put that together. And after working 14 or 16 hours, what I did was I went home, I slept for a few hours, jumped in the shower, ran down here, and I jumped into the bucket brigade. And of course, at that point, it was complete confusion. Nobody knew who was here, who was assigned here. You know, again, in retrospect, it probably wasn't the best idea. But what did work very well is that you felt like you were tangibly helping out. You know, and even though you were sifting through what you knew there would be this was not going to be the story of survival being down at this site. You knew sifting through those buckets, those ashes, those cremated remains, and the body parts that it just wasn't going to be that story. Yet it still felt very important. And you know, I would go back to my colleagues and we would talk back home while we were doing our 14 to 16-hour shifts, and I'd be like, you know, Frank, John, Bobby, listen, we got to get down here. This is what, you know, what we're doing now. You know, again, not to sound a little callous, but when you go to somebody's 9/11 call because they're having a roommate dispute over who ate whose food in the refrigerator, you know, and you got this going on over here. It's just, you know, we're human beings. It just, you kind of, it's hard to act like this is what's important. So we did, and what I did is I encouraged all my colleagues to come, and we did stand here shoulder to shoulder in the bucket brigade. And again, it was a very immense feeling that you were actually pitching in a concrete way. Again, the other thing I didn't think about then that I understand now is that the 911 emergency system doesn't take a vacation just because New York is suffering the greatest tragedy in its history. People do still call 911. People still need emergency service. But again, the human part of you doesn't really kind of connect that. In any event, so, you know, and of course, the NYPD isn't really recognized for surveying its employees and trying to cater to all our needs. You know, there are people that were sent down here initially and in the weeks and months that didn't want to see this. They didn't want to be exposed to the atrocities here. And then there were folks like myself and some of my colleagues that only felt that we were helping if we were part of this. But I got to tell you, when you're exposed to what's going on, when you're down here, you're on the bucket brigade and somebody passes you a bucket and over the top of the bucket splashes a severed woman's leg and it crosses your chest. And you're staring down at this thing and you know you'll never see this again. And just before, you know, as the impact of this hits you and it starts settling into you, here you are hit with another bucket, you know? You got to keep moving. Keep the line moving. Let's keep it going on. And there were people that were exposed to that was never able to work this job again afterward. And then, so it's a touching and scary idea. It took about 5 years for one of my colleagues to start feeling the effects of 9/11, my friend Robert Zane. He noticed that he had a little spotting of blood in his urine, and he was a fit guy. He was a workout guy. He was a fitness guy. He was in his young 40s. He went to the doctor that day, and he was already given a death sentence. His kidney was twice its normal size. The doctor would not even let him leave home. They just cut it open like the next day that they scheduled it into the operating room, and I sat next to him. I remember it was Super Bowl Sunday. It was the only reigning Super Bowl that we've had in a lot of years, and we watched a boring game together as he recovered. But from that point on, though, the cancer, as they put him through a battery of tests, it had spread from his kidneys to nodules in his lungs, to eventually to his spine, and then to his brain. It took about 2 years, I'm sorry. It took about 2 years for him to finally suffer all the effects. And when Bobby finally passed, he had a 2-year-old son and a 2-week-old daughter that was just born. Fortunately, he was strong enough to hold his daughter before he passed. So I do this, I volunteer down here with obviously a lot of survivor's guilt, as you can imagine, because while I know Bobby was strong enough to probably come out here and do it on his own, at the end of the day, I know I encouraged him to come. And he stood next to me. And he's now gone and I'm still here. So one of the reasons why I do this, I volunteer, and thank you for listening, is just to preserve his spirit, his sacrifice, his honor. And thank you very much. I'm sure I forgot a lot, but we could talk after.
Yeah, September 11th is not a story that has come to a conclusion. There are still many workers who were here on the pile, as it was called, and they are now suffering in terms of their health. For example, the deaths of 12 police officers have been attributed to September 11th related illnesses. Their names have been added to the NYPD memorial here in Lower Manhattan. On September 11th, Matt's father had been a New York City firefighter for over 32 years. And of course, he too rushed down here to the Trade Center that morning.
Hello, everybody. All right, so growing up for me, in my mind, I lived with a Superman. And in my case, my Superman was about 5'9", piercing blue eyes, a bushy mustache, a pot belly. And that was my father, firefighter Robert J. Crawford, who had 32 and a half years on the service, when September 11th occurred, and he was murdered in the South Tower, doing a job that he absolutely loved. Growing up having a father who was a firefighter, you get to experience a lot of things that people don't get to know about. Firefighter family is a very tight-knit. One of my fondest memories, I was 7 years old. I'm the youngest of 5. My father came by, I think it was a Tuesday night or so, with the fire truck at about 11 o'clock at night, woke us all up. We were all in our PJs, took us on the fire truck, drove us around the neighborhood, turned the lights and sirens on. I'm sure the neighbors loved that one. But you can imagine for a 7-year-old boy to be woken up on a school night in your pajamas in a fire truck with the lights and sirens going on. To this day, if I close my eyes, I could smell the inside of that fire truck. Bring your parent to school. 4th grade, my teacher, Mrs. Wallach, I still call her that to this day because she was such a tyrant. Told my father, Bobby, you could show up, but just do me a favor. Don't bring any of the dangerous stuff. So my father said, sure, no problem, Roberta. He called her by her first name because she didn't like that. And when he showed up, what do you think he did? He brought all the stuff she asked him not to bring. So now you have 4th graders with the turnout boots on, which on a man are up to here, on a 4th grader are about up to here. So they're tripping around the classroom. He brought the axes, the pikes, the pole arms. You have kids hitting desks with the axes. Mrs. Wallach is having a stroke. But now all your friends want to be your best friend because they see that your father's a hero. These are the cool things that they get to do. I was very good at 2 things when I was younger: hurting myself and eating a lot of food. Firefighters are very good at 2 things: cooking. You know, you have all these men in a firehouse, right? There's no ladies around for the most part. So ladies, if you ever want a good meal, pop by a firehouse. Guys, it doesn't work out that well for you, but ladies are always welcome. And they save people. So it was a match made in heaven for me and my father. So you fast forward now to September 11th. At this point in my life, I have a brother who's a cop, a sister who's a cop, and my father's a firefighter. I didn't know who was working, who wasn't working. I was out of town at the time. I woke up at 10:30 that day. I slept through the whole entire thing. My father dying, September 11th, all of it, the attacks, the buildings coming down, I slept through every piece of it. I woke up and I saw it on the news. Every single phone line was down, bridge and tunnel was closed. I couldn't get to my family, couldn't hear from them, had no idea what was going on. At about 2 o'clock that morning, my brother got through to me. I was very happy to hear his voice. He said, I'm okay, Rachel's fine, but we can't find Dad. I said, well, Dad's a firefighter, Mark. He's not going to stop and make a phone call. He's busy saving people. He said, no, you don't understand. I'm here now at the site with what's left of the people he worked with. They don't know where he is. You have to get here as soon as you can. I got home, and the next couple days are very hazy. A phone call kind of snapped me out of that. My mother answered the phone, and she screamed out, he's alive. And she just dropped to her knees and made a sound that I will never forget. And everybody in the house was cheering. And I said, how do you know? She said, oh, Aunt Joan saw his name on a survivors list on the internet. I said, all right, me and Mark will come down here and we'll go get him. So me and my brother came down to this site. And the first thing we did, we ran to the first group of firefighters we could see. Bobby Crawford, 11904, have you heard anything? Have you seen anything? He said, no, but check this group of guys. And we went to the next one, and to the next one, to the next one. We got down here at about 8 o'clock that morning, that Thursday. And all of a sudden my brother turns to me and he says, hey, you know, we got to stop. We got to get something to eat. We got to drink something. I looked at my watch. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. 8 hours had gone by like that. I sat across the street and I sat down. It was the first time I looked at the site where I was. And believe it or not, it was the first time I had actually seen the devastation because I was laser focused on finding my father. And then all the things that I had seen throughout the day started to come back to me. In about 2 seconds, everything I'm about to tell you hit me like a ton of bricks. And I just remembered all the white gurneys with nobody on them. I knew the look I had on my face, sheer terror, sheer confusion. I'm a construction worker. I don't do this for a living. I don't save people. My brother, at this point, I think had about 11 years on. This is what he did for a living. He was just as scared as I was. And then I remember all the first responders walking around here, that same exact look on their face. And it was that moment that I knew nobody was coming out of this site alive. One of those people was my father. Now I realized that I'm down here for 8 hours, haven't been able to talk to anybody. My mother, my sisters, aunts and uncles, everybody thought I was coming down here to come grab my father with my brother and bring him back home. How am I going to go home and look at my mother in the face coming back empty-handed? To this day, I don't know what I said when I walked through that door. I decided I don't want to be part of this human race anymore. If this is what man was capable of, I don't want to be part of it. I said, you know what, I'll get through everything I have to get through and then I'm done. And as I was sitting there having this thought, some lady who lived in the neighborhood, who had no idea what she could do to make things better, rode by on a bike with a little basket in the front, bottles of water, and I don't know if everybody here is familiar with peanut butter and jelly. If you're not, I suggest you try it. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich, believe it or not, saved my life. She said nothing to me. She just gave me this sandwich, this bottle of water, gave me this look that said, I don't know what I could possibly do to make it better, but I love you and I'm here for you, and it was enough. I'm still here. I had 2 other sons. I had one at that point, Andrew. I had 2 more. One, Robert James Crawford II. That's how he'll introduce himself, because he knows how important that name is, who never got to meet his grandfather, which kills me every day. Never gets easier. Seeing as how what just happened in France, I just want you to take a message of love from what I'm telling you now today, because I am not scared of terrorists. I don't hate them, I pity them, because if that's what you do in life, to try to harm people, I just can't understand how somebody, their life could be bent on that. There was a hell of a lot more love here that day, and to this day, millions of people come here every year to see where my father was, to pay respects to him, and the almost 3,000 other people that died here that day. There was a lot more good that came out of September 11th than bad, and don't believe anything else other than that. Thank you for listening to my story.
$343. That is the number of active duty New York City firefighters who were killed that morning. It was unprecedented in the history of this city, and they were not alone. 23 New York City police officers dead, 37 Port Authority police dead. September 11th is the worst loss of first responders, not just in New York City history, but in United States history. We always leave time at the end, and we do that because we would like to hear from you. Questions. If there's anything you thought I would love to ask somebody who was here that day, this is your moment. I know this can be overwhelming, so I'll just give you a moment to collect your thoughts. And that's it. Time is up. Who's going to be brave? Who's going to do it first?
Nothing too rough. So we've heard it all, so please don't be shy.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Matt, did they ever find your father?
Yes, they did, and that's, pardon me for getting a bit weepy before, but when I do tours, I never ask the other person I'm doing a tour with their story, and that's the first time I heard Gino's story, and it got to me a little bit. They found my father, and we were notified on Thanksgiving of 2001. So when Gino was telling his story, he didn't know it, but him and his friend Bobby, they were looking for my father. They didn't know it, but they were. So you hear about somebody who came down here and they also risked their life and paid the ultimate price. I didn't know Bobby, but and to know that you know, one of those guys passed away, it affects me. So.
Was it meaningful for you to have some of your father's remains found?
Yes, it definitely was. My father was one of the few bodies that they found intact. They also did find additional remains, which actually part of him is in the museum. So my father was always trying in life to find a way to be in 2 places at once. He's finally done it. And he's part of this museum. So, and the fact that I work here just means he was always checking up on me. So.
20,000 human remains were what were recovered, and of them, only 174 were mostly intact bodies. So that is the reference that Matt just made to his father, being one of the intact bodies. Anyone else? All right, we're not going to torture you. If anything comes to you, please, we'll be right outside the exit door. Do not hesitate to approach either of these gentlemen. They will be happy to speak with you. Before we go, I would just like to thank all of you. And yes, thank you for having chosen to spend some of your time with us, but even more important, thank you because you are essential to our storytelling. It is with you that we take a piece of a brutal and obscene day And by sharing it, we do what we have just done together. We make from it a human connection, and that is life-affirming. So this, for us, is essentially, ultimately, a life-affirming experience. And we thank you for participating in that.